Hey everyone, and welcome back to Miles on the Grid. This is your host Miles. In today's episode, we have the amazing Denny, aka FIA Girlie on Twitter, to join us and discuss all things strategy, talk about data and why it's important within motorsport, but also look at the potential fallout from last week's race, which was the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. However, that's not going to be the main focus. We're going to have a nice chat and discuss all things strategy, and see how we go from there. All right, let's get straight into it. Cool. So, welcome, Denny. Thank you for coming onto the podcast.
Hi, thank you. Actually, this is my first podcast I'm recording as FIA Girlie.
Okay.
So this is still a bit strange waters for me. Well, thank you for inviting me.
No, honestly, it's a pleasure. I've been seeing the work that you've been doing on Twitter for 9-10 months now. Well, I think even since 2,000 followers, which is pretty cool. And you've just blown up from there in a good way. And you've got some really interesting takes when it comes to motorsport, but also your takes on the news that pops out. So I thought you'd be a great addition to the show. Just out of interest, I'll kick off by asking, what got you interested in motorsport?
Right. Okay. So I'm an athlete myself.
Nice.
Right. I'm a swimmer, and so it got to a point where I'm into sports, I sometimes indulge into different sports to see how other players do, how other athletes do.
Yeah.
And it got to a point where I was so tired of football, I was like, okay, let me look for something else.
Yeah.
My industry, right? And so I got into F1 because, I already knew about F1, but specifically into details, it was more because I saw a lot of friends talking about it, but I was like, there's certainly more about this sport. It's certainly not just cars going around,
Yeah.
So I started investigating it a bit more, and outside of what I already know, like Vettel and all these great drivers, Lewis Hamilton and all that, I started investigating, and I found a lot of similarities with my sport.
Nice.
And I was like, wow, I was like, the same way these people are trying to get the smallest tenth down is the same way we do in the water. So if you put your hand in a different way, it's the same way if you cut a corner in a different way, you lose some time. And I was like, this is so nice. And so that's how I got into the technical bits of it, because when I got back into F1, we can say that got back into F1 recently, and I was like, I don't care about these drivers, I care about what they're doing with their cars. And so I think that's what got me into it. It was me being an athlete and saying, okay, I don't want to look at football anymore, what is the next big thing? And I was like, oh, F1 is, and that's how I just got into it.
That's pretty cool, if I'm honest, because I think the point you made about always trying to find that extra edge of performance is something which I relate to, but also I know a lot of sports people relate to.
It's funny.
Sorry. No, after you go on.
Yeah, it's funny because one familiar thing, because as swimmers, every year the companies that build our suits, because we have specific suits to compete in, right?
Yes.
So every year that they building the suits, they try to find different materials to make us go faster in water. And it's kind of like what they do with the cars,
Yeah.
It's kind of wait, can we change the wing? Can we change the setup on this? And for me, it was this is so interesting, because you would never think someone in the water is relating to someone in the road. And so it was wow, I really like this sport. So it's funny,
It's interesting that you mentioned that you can even change the composition of your swimsuit, and even the composition of your stroke when you're entering the water, because I think when you look at a sport like swimming or even F1, for example, many things can change the factor of your race. It can change the factor of your speed, whether it's the wind, whether it's water pressure. What do you think is most important for F1 at the moment in terms of when it comes to the car? To you.
For me, I think it's kind of a balance of having a driver that can adapt and you knowing how to set up your car.
Cool.
I think those are the most key things, because you can't go wrong if your driver knows how to do it and when to do it. Does that make sense? Because one thing I've noticed a lot is some drivers stick to their driving style and some drivers don't. So other drivers, although they're known for certain things, they're able to say, okay, forget everything that I know, this track needs a different way for me to approach it. So I think in F1, despite all the little things, externals that come in, there's two things you can control, and those things are how your driver approaches the race or the track, and how you set up your car. So for me, those are the two things I always look into, is like, how is this driver doing it, and how is this team helping them with the setup of the car.
It's funny you touched on that, because you just touched on a part of strategy, which I wanted to ask about, because you've got a really interesting take on this. When it comes to setup and the setting up of a car, there's obviously different takes for different drivers and teams can go or take going into a weekend. What would you say is key for the differences in performance between like qualifying as well as a race? Because obviously there's different setups, there's different approaches, different tracks as well as track evolution. But what for you sort of stands out?
I think when it comes to setup, to be honest, I don't see it as it being like, it doesn't differ, right? Setup is something that the teams are trying to get to
Yes.
the perfect one. There's never like a perfect setup, but like throughout the weekend, they're trying to find the perfect setup, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think there's a particular thing that stands out that I say, oh, that is one thing you need to be focused on. Because there's the basics. There's like, you know which wing you should go for when you're in a track that doesn't need as much downforce. You know how much you need to add onto that to make downforce or to get downforce off, right? So with me, setup is not like, I don't look at a specific point and say, you need to make sure that's on there.
Yeah.
It's about how you build throughout the weekend, and that's one thing. That's why I enjoy practices the most. And I hope I'm not rambling.
No, it's fine.
But it's the fact that you have a car that's basically like coming off from a different race. You have data from previous races. You need to set up that car again. You need to sit down with your team and say, how is this car going to be the best on the grid in this track, right?
Yeah.
So you have 3 hours essentially to get the perfect car. And with me, that's what's intriguing. It's kind of like you're starting on a fresh slate, you're tuning things, and your driver has to go around and say, okay, add more wing. Okay, take some off. Okay, can we switch things and all of that? And like when it comes to, for instance, modes of engine, they also have to try different modes.
Yes.
Right? Where they're coming in and saying, okay, I want a more aggressive mode. Oh no, I think the car can do just well with the engine that we have. The car can do just well with a bit less aggressive and all of that. So I think it's a combination of things where the team goes in and says, how can we find the perfect for this track? If that makes sense.
No, it's definitely an interesting approach, and I think how you described it in terms of it's a combination of the perfect driver as well as the impossible but almost perfect setup in order to try and achieve that perfect balance. I'm thinking back to a couple of races earlier this year, for example, the French Grand Prix at Paul Ricard, where you saw Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas struggle with their setup, and you saw Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez nearly optimise theirs across like P1 to P3 and then going into qualifying. How would you, I don't want to say how would you describe your perfect strategy weekend, but has there been a race which has stood out to you in terms of, oh my gosh, that was a perfect strategy which was executed? I'm trying to stay away from Spain because I know it's it's always up there, but
it's something everyone goes straight into it. One that's happened, or one that I saw and I was like, this is going to work. Which one would you put there?
We could go for both. Let's start with one that's happened.
One that's happened, I think Bahrain was probably that. Yeah, the first race, I think Bahrain was the perfect one where they knew what to do.
Yes.
And the car was specific. I kind of don't remember how tyres worked at that race because my memory isn't the greatest. But I remember specifically where we came from testing, and we, I say Mercedes, came from testing, and they were in a position where we are the underdogs here. Yeah. How are we going to do it? And it didn't come down to how much the car was performing, if that makes sense. It came down to how are we going to get this to work. Because I remember they weren't even on pole when they qualified, and they were saying, we need to make sure Lewis is 100% on top of Max every single time. And that's what they did. With the pit stops, that's what they did. And every single time, if we're going to have to mirror strategies, then we're going to have to mirror strategies. And I remember that was something that I watched, and I was like, So it's not just performance of the car that you need to pay attention to, right? Because if you ask anyone, they're going to tell you that race wasn't Mercedes to win. It was Red Bulls, right? Because they had come out stronger. They were on pole. They had everything. The car was up there. But strategy came down to how are you going to react when you need to do your pit stops, when you need to put on fresher tires and your car's less heavy. How are you going to perform then? And that played for Mercedes's benefit.
Nice. That's an interesting one, because I the season is so long now. I almost forgot about it. I was like, crap, what happened in Bahrain? But that was a really, really good race when you just think about how Mercedes sort of, like you mentioned, had to mirror Red Bull and Red Bull vice versa. I think for me, without referencing Spain, because I really want to try and stay away from, because it is like the most obvious one.
Everyone goes to Spain.
I would also say the USA Grand Prix, and I say it because I'm a Lewis fan. Before you get at me like, what's going on? It was really interesting to see where time was lost and gained between Ferrari, Red Bull, and Mercedes. You had Ferrari running really close, as well as up with Daniel Ricciardo. You had Red Bull jumping ahead and sort of triggering that early set of pit stops with Mercedes, sort of forcing them into it. And the strategy in seeing Lewis trying to overtake Max.
Teamwork as well. Red Bull really pulled with Max calling the shots and going, you know what?
Yeah.
Let's force Lewis into that pit stop with Checo, you know?
It was smart. It was so smart. And I think every F1 driver has that in their toolbox. But I think that the way that Max and Red Bull in particular this year operated when it came to strategy, one, took me by surprise, because they've always done bold stuff in the past, but maybe we didn't get to see it from like a commentary perspective. But the USA Grand Prix to me just stood out as, oh crap, Mercedes need to react now for Lewis's benefit. Max and Red Bull have pulled a blinder. What's going to happen next? And I think that leads to the next question that I've got. In terms of future strategy, I know you alluded to it earlier. What would be your ideal scenario for a race? Would it be a wacky four-stopper? Would it be a one-stopper?
I think for me, two-stoppers are always exciting. I think that's one thing that I always try to look after. Because strategy on its own, like the reason why strategies exist is because someone in F1 was like, we can't just have these people driving around in the train, right? We need to make sure these people are mixing each other. We need to make sure these engineers are actually thinking about how can we do it? How can we stop for 20 seconds and still win, you know? And it's 20 seconds today. Before it was even more. Yeah. And so, obviously before it was like the whole refueling process and all of that. But for me, not 5 pit stops, but like the more pit stops you have, for me is kind of exciting because it shows how much you come into your weekend thinking two stops, how are we going to win, right? So that's already 40 seconds that you're going to be in the box. How do you shave off 40 seconds off your opponent? So I think for me, the ideal race where strategy comes into play is where you need to stop twice. So any race where people are saying, okay, it's going to be a 2-stop, I'm kind of like, okay, I'm diving into that because I want to see how they approach their weekend. Are they going to test all tyres? Yes. Or are they going to test 2 tyres? Which tyres are performing better than the other, right? How are they setting up their car? So I'm usually like on onboards looking at which driver is saying, okay, I want more wing. Which wing are you using? Like for the downforce, right? Yeah. So that's obviously, you already know that from the track. But for me, the more controversy you have in the race, the more exciting it is because it puts load off the driver, I think, and it puts it on the team. So that's when you see teamwork actually coming out and play. Because if you just stop in once, it's almost easier. Like, okay, start with the mediums because everyone qualifies on the mediums, and then we go to hard. That's fine. The driver just needs to perform and handle the tires perfectly, right, off the perfect balance. But if you have 2, you kind of like, okay, what if a safety car comes in? Yes. Okay, what if someone undercuts us? What if they overcut us? How are we going to do all of these things? So for me, the perfect weekend is going to be you did 2 pit stops and you came out victorious, or your car was like in the top 3 or something like that. For me, those are like the best races to watch and analyze.
Interesting. I think a two-stopper for me is always fascinating because, like you mentioned, you're trying to see what happens with the car in front or behind, or even let's say like 10 cars back. But I didn't account for the safety car when I was thinking about it, because I think last year we had a safety car in 70% of the races, and then if you count Mugello, it was like basically half of the race.
I had like 3.
Yeah.
Like straight on 3 races.
Which
was hanging, but I was like, I need to win so bad. Yeah.
Which is crazy. And then obviously we've had an interesting safety car last week, which merges very interestingly into, I use that word way too much, but it flows very well into my next question.
Yeah.
Was Lewis Hamilton robbed?
100%. Like, that's not even a question. No, he was.
Yeah.
He was robbed. It was... The thing is, if you take out all the factors of, like, race and who he is and all of that, and you look back into data, right?
Yes.
You look at what's objective and what's tangible and what you can talk about the car. It was perfect.
Yeah.
Let me tell you that. It was perfect. At any point was he beat. Even when he was defending off Checo, and this is like a wild thing that I tell people, even when Lewis was being defended off Checo, he was behind Checo, his times were still faster than Max.
Yes.
Even at that point. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it never got to a point where he was like, okay, these tires are shot, we are screwed, what are we going to do? Because he was leading that race from the ground up. And all he needed was those 3 laps to finish.
Yeah.
And so 100% he was robbed. And there's no question about it. This is the noise we need to make sure we're making, because that was... We watched that happen in our eyes. Like, they literally, like, pulled the carpet off our feet. Literally.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to take a slightly different take. I do believe he was robbed. But I've already slightly covered one angle, so I'm going to try and I'm trying to view it from a neutral viewpoint. I'm trying, for the purposes of the podcast anyway. When it comes to strategy, we've seen Mercedes do some interesting work this year. I'm not going to call out anyone, I don't want to get sued, and potentially I would love to work for in the future. But do we think that there's anything that Mercedes could have done during the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix in order to ensure that even if let's say Michael Massey decided to do what he did, Lewis would have been secure?
When you put it like that, I feel like the answer is always going to be yes. I feel like the answer is always going to be yes, because there is no perfect race, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So one thing a lot of people are going to try and chime on and like bite off is the fact that he was on old tyres. So when that is said, maybe you go back and you say, okay, maybe under that virtual safety car he could have pit, right? But that also opens like a can of worms.
Yes.
That unleashes a lot of things, because then you start asking yourself, okay, he would have pit and now he's P2. What guarantees us that he would have been able to pass Red Bull?
Yeah.
Right? So now you start going into these maths questions where you're like, okay, you need to calculate Max's average, and you calculate Lewis's average, and then it just kind of goes on the back and forth, which is good for us. We enjoyed the data.
Yeah.
So to answer you honestly, yes, they could have done something differently, which would have given Lewis a chance to fight, right? At least on those 2 laps, because he would have had maybe, I wouldn't say fresher than, because Verstappen stopped twice. He got 2 pit stops, right? So he would probably be sitting on the medium tyres, which would have been at least 10, 15 laps older than what Verstappen would have, because he stopped for the soft tyres. So the answer is yes, maybe they could have, but at the same time, you look at these and you think those hard tyres were fine. So what is our argument to say he should have changed it? Because time wasn't really dropping for him. So you can argue both sides. I think if you like the debate and you enjoy the strategy and the data and looking at things and doing all these maths, you could say, yeah, he should have pit in the VSC. It could have maybe helped him. But if you kind of on like a more tangible side of things, where you're like, it is what it is, there was nothing else they could have done, to be honest.
Very good answer. That's quite
quite
balanced. And I think
I tried.
I could tell. Do you think that Red Bull and Max pulled a blinder then, in the sense of they said, you know what, we're going to throw a Hail Mary regardless of what happens. Let's see what... Because I'm not getting into the conspiracy side in terms of Latifi. I like Latifi.
Yeah.
I saw his statement today, but did they just throw up a Hail Mary, or was it a calculated risk?
No, that was exactly it. And I think if you watch the race, you can tell, like maybe in the moment not, but if you go back and you watch it, you understand the desperation that was in that Red Bull pit, right?
Yeah.
Because at some point they were like, that strategy can go to hell.
Yeah.
We're going to do everything that we can to make sure this driver is on that finish line. And take safety car apart,
yes,
right? Take that safety car apart. Look at how every chance they got to pit, they pit a Max. Because it was visible that Lewis's pace was visible. It was tangible. You could tell that they couldn't put Checo there again. They couldn't put any other driver in there because you would just need 2-3 laps to pass them, right?
Yeah.
So I think at some point Red Bull was like, guys, if we want to fight this pace, we need to capitalize off everything that comes our way. So every PFC, every safety car, every single thing like that. And I think that was something that Mercedes also realized, and that's why Toto kind of came out desperate, like, please don't pull out a safety car because we know these people are gonna go in there.
Yeah.
Because on Mercedes' end, the stance was always, we cannot give track position.
Yes.
We cannot give track position. And you hear these things, right? Red Bull hears Mercedes, Mercedes hears Red Bull.
Yeah.
So Red Bull, basically, Max's engineer knows these people are never going to pit.
Yeah.
They're going to make sure Lewis goes long and Lewis finishes. So we do the exact opposite. We put pressure.
Yes.
Because at some point his tires have to give, right? And so I think Red Bull was like, if we are not defending, we are going to attack, and our attack is going to get us that win. And unfortunately, it did under circumstances that it did, but that was exactly what they were trying to do, and it worked for them, right? So I'm sure they just threw away the strategy book. They were like, nope, we're going to pitch you every single time, get you on fresh tires, you go attack the point. That's exactly what they did.
And you know what? I think as much as it pains me as a Lewis fan, like I used to be a Max fan as well, it was a good strategy. I can't take anything away from it because it worked, although under very dubious circumstances. But do you think that type of strategy, or even... No, let me rephrase the question. Do you think that strategy will have a massive part to play going into 22, given the fact that the cars are supposed to, according to Ross Brawn, be able to follow a lot closer, be more aerodynamic or aerodynamic resistant? Do you think that strategy will play such a key part as we've seen in previous years?
Like them just going pit every single time to attack. I think it's a very sensitive thing to talk about, especially because we don't know how the new tires are going to work.
Yeah.
I mean, they're expected to last long, so if they're lasting long, I don't think those strategies are going to like glue, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Because you're expecting tire performance to be high for a longer period of times. So I'm expecting. I personally think the idea of having long-lasting tires contradicts the idea of having a strategy.
Yeah.
Because it kind of, you are forced to pit, but at the same time you are giving us more tire life. So when do you want us to pit? How do you want us to do that? Are we using our tires, Yeah. So I think if the tires do what Pirelli wants them to do, I don't see how such strategies would work. Because I think if it's a one-stop, you just use 2 compounds.
Yeah.
Unless Pirelli's just like messing with us and they give us tires that are kind of like dead by 10 laps, then for sure that's going to happen. But then we need to take into account that cars can only do that so long as they're on par when it comes to performance.
Yeah.
So long as because you can't have like an Alpine pitting every single time because they're never going to be able to get back on that track position, right?
Yeah.
Because Max lost a lot, but he was easily gaining. I think it took him like 3-4 laps to get past the Ferraris that were on his way to go get behind Lewis.
Yeah.
So you still need a car that's on pace, that's going to say, okay, we can gamble on pitting you 3 times because you're able to, in 3 laps, you're able to be back behind your opponent and pass them, right? So if the cars are like very off each other when it comes to speed, then I don't see how that would even come into the playbook.
That's interesting because I don't think... from the tyre tests that we've seen so far, everyone's gathering all this data from the mule cars, and we're all getting excited. I'm like, yes, you know, George Russell in a Mercedes, and I can't remember who was in a Ferrari that came first on data. I can't remember now. It feels like it was weeks away, but but we're talking about potential strategies going into 22. But we haven't thought about the possibility if, let's say, the FIA decided to say, let's just have like a massive sprint race. We've had one red flag go from, I don't know, lap 3 to lap 10. Let's just have a sprint race to the end because the new tyres can handle it. What do teams do in a situation, or in a potential situation like that?
Like in the middle of the race?
In the middle of a race, because I'm not taking regulations for what they are. We've seen that it's been disregarded before. Yeah.
So they're like, okay, let's just freestyle it. Let's just go sprint to the finish line.
Yeah.
I think that ends up being like a restart. It would probably be like the same thing as red flagging a session and just letting it go again, right?
Yeah.
So I think that would be teams just 100% relying on the pace of the car and the driver. So that would be when you kind of like, okay, strategy books out. Lewis, you got this. Max, you got this, and see how it was. Because I think essentially, if you red flag a session, or if you go in like, okay, let's have a sprint race, everyone's going to put fresh tires, everyone's going to tune in their car, whatever they have to do, and change it, whatever. And they're going to go, well, now it's on you. Now you do what you have to do and be the driver that you are, you know?
Yeah.
So if they have to do that, I hope not. But if they do that, it's going to be like a battle of driver versus driver and which car's fastest, I think. Because strategy is not going to play anymore, right? So you have to take away everything else that can play into it from the outside because it's not there anymore. And so it would be a lot of, now we're trusting Lewis, and now we're trusting Max, or now we're trusting Gasly, or whoever else, you know. I think that's how it would be.
That's an interesting point, because I guess the tyre whisperers like Perez and Lewis and, dare I say, Alonso with plans, they'll just come through. So we'll see what happens. And I think that leads me to sort of my final question, because I'm aware of time as well. Who are your favourite drivers? I know that Lewis is up there. I know he is the GOAT for you. I've seen enough of your posts on Twitter to know that's your number one. But have any other drivers impressed you either this year or even in years past?
Okay, I think this is the best. It's not the first time I'm gonna say it officially, sure. Right? My number one driver is actually Esteban Ocon.
Ooh, okay, fair enough.
Yeah, he's actually he's been since I think I rejoined the sport.
Yeah.
And Lewis is a very close second, and obviously I ride for Lewis because he's the GOAT, he's the greatest of all time and all of that, and I think I resonate with him on a personal level. So me being an athlete, me being black, and I think you can understand that, but you know, so it's him, the person that I'm always going to worship and look after. When it comes to like driving style, I think I personally use a bit more of a discernment, and I try to look for little things and little people, and so Ocon is like a very, very good shining star in my book. But yeah, those two are definitely like, I could say they're both my favourite drivers. I could just say that.
Yeah.
Like Ocon, Lewis, and then I start to grow a bit more into Charles Leclerc. I think he's a bit of a good driver as well.
Yeah.
Who else? Yeah, I think those would be probably my top three. And then you'd have like Gasly, you'd have Vettel in there, even though people say he's washed.
He's so far from washed at the moment. I don't think people realise. People do not realise he's. If you go back and watch Russia.
Aston Martin.
Yeah. Watch Russia. Watch Sochi. Watch British Grand Prix in the sprint. Watch Hungary, Monaco. Like.
Okay. And the thing is, the thing that people do to Vettel is. Maybe it's a gender, I don't know. But the same way people talk about Russell and they go, oh, he's putting a Williams in Q3. The car is not doing what he wanted to do. It's the same way you could say about Vettel, right?
Yeah.
Like, the car is not doing what he knows what he can do, right? And people use a lot of, like, his Ferrari era, blah, blah. But I think if you give Vettel a good car, he's going to be up there.
But
that's what I'm saying.
I mean, take Vettel at Ferrari, for example. Yeah, I'm a massive Charles Leclerc fan. So, for me, it's Lewis, then Leclerc, then it's Gasly and Russell, and now Max. Used to be Max on par with Lewis, but yeah, that's changed after this year. I've seen a few too many things, should I say, on track and off track as well. But I'm not. If I speak. Let's not offend any Max fans. We do love Max fans on the show as well. But what was I saying? I can't remember now. Vettel, yes. So if you go back to Vettel's Ferrari days, take away 2020, that year was absolutely horrific for both him and Charles, although Charles is able to produce some magic with unstable cars. Vettel was a key part of the development of the 17 and 18 cars, even the 19 cars as well. He's someone that, fair enough, they had the secret engine, which the FIA did a sort of behind closed doors deal on, with help from Red Bull and Mercedes, but he still put that car in positions where at times it shouldn't have been anywhere near to a Mercedes. Like, he got close to Bottas and Lewis. He beat Lewis over the first part of both seasons. He won races. You know, everyone says he's washed because he got washed by Ricciardo in, I think it was 2014, at Red Bull. Great, Ricciardo is a master late breaker. You know, he's still one of the best in the sport.
Charles also beat him in the Ferrari.
Charles beat him in the Ferrari, and everyone's like, oh, you know, Vettel's done. No, the same thing that could happen with Lewis next year, which I pray doesn't initially, but it's likely it will with age and speed. The same thing that will happen when someone comes up with Max, who might be like 15 years old. I mean, Vettel is not done, and I just think that people need, especially maybe fans who just started watching this season, especially because he's made some errors like that Silverstone spin, etc. Put some respect to his name. He's a 4-time world champion for a reason.
I know. I think people actually. I saw someone tweet saying like, I think people forget Sebastian Vettel was a 4-time world champion, and I thought about it because I do too. Like sometimes, even though I rate him, I also sometimes I'm like, oh wait, this guy. And you know, it got to a point where Vettel would actually win constructors as well on his own. There were times when Webber wasn't able to match his pace. Him and Lewis, 2012 in Abu Dhabi. Him and Alonso, 2010. It's like there's a lot to his name that people just seem to forget. Yeah. I know what you mean. You know, I know.
Like he might have peaked early, but he's still there. Like I could wish to be the driver that he is now, let alone back then. So I'm not going to disrespect him. I think one of the stars for the future, and I'm not going to talk about Russell because I believe the hype. I am there. I take it you're not, but that's fine.
I'm not.
No, that's fine. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out next year, because I can see some tension happening, even though I don't want it to happen. Sadly. But one of the underrated stars for me is Lance Stroll.
Really?
I will say that. And I say this because he's always been sort of rated as, you know, his dad's bought the team and he's got a safe seat because funding follows him wherever he goes. I get that. Yeah, I'm not disputed that. This year he's worked in Aston Martin and hasn't made it surprise anyone. It's been where it sort of should have been from a performance perspective. But look at Turkey last year. The way he finessed that car to put it on pole in the wet. The way he was able to get did he get P2 in Bahrain, the short circuit last year? What was that? I can't remember. I think it was P3.
Like P1 or something. Didn't he win a race?
No, he should have won Turkey, technically, because he was gapping Max, Perez, Lewis, everyone. Last year. He had a really strong race, I think it was in Sochi.
I think, was it strategy that came into play?
Strategy came into play, and he was missing a bit of, I think he was missing part of his barge board, or he hit something on the underbody, and it was losing him downforce points. But he's quick. Mugello, he was in the running for that podium before his tyre blew out. In the right car. And that's just me saying it. I think he could be cool.
I would agree with you until, he is quick. He's okay. He's a good driver.
Yeah.
He wouldn't be there if he wasn't. And I think one of the things that made me erase this image of, a paid driver was look at his previous things in, F seasons, whatever, before
Yeah.
F1, right? Which he's good. He won races and stuff like that. But I kind of have to counter in who he's up against, right?
True.
Because
True.
this fight isn't with his teammate. Because Vettel has his life done. He has he's a world champion, whatever. He doesn't care about these things. But he's up like generation talents, basically. Up against Leclerc. He's up against Verstappen. He's up against Gasly.
Yeah.
He's up against Norris. He's in my list. If I had to make a list, he would be like at the bottom. Even Norris would probably be higher up.
Yeah.
You know. So for me, he gets like overshadowed. I think in F1 specifically, it's hard for you to isolate one driver and say that driver is good on his own, because you need to take into account that for you to be on that top step of that podium, you need to beat these 20 other drivers. What do you have that's different to these other drivers, right? Because you can give them a good car and then give Norris a good car, who's going to come out on top,
Ooh.
right?
Ooh,
You know?
that's a debate for a whole other day, because Lando's on fire.
You give Charles Leclerc, you give Charles Leclerc a good car. You give Lance Stroll a good car. Is he gonna win?
No, Leclerc will
He'll
walk
this
in.
is why I'm very selective with how I rate the drivers, because I put myself in a position where I'm like, okay, let's forget the fact that this one is an Aston Martin, that one's in a Mercedes. Let's put them in both the same cars. Is he going to take his chances?
Yeah,
Is he going to 100% beat this guy? Probably not. So I hear you, but for me, I'm kind of like, Stroll, wait.
No, I hear you. I'm probably one of the only people on Twitter hyping the Lance Stroll bandwagon at the moment. But you know what? I'll stay strong until he gets that next pole position.
Yeah. That's good. We rep the underdogs here. That's why. I thought Lando Norris is going to do what he's doing today. So.
Wow. I'm waiting to see what happens with the McLaren 2022 car, especially now that it's had some of Daniel's input, because we've seen that the second half of the season, a mini update that they brought, some of Daniel's input, Daniel became quicker, and we saw a bit of a disparity. So yeah. I love Lando, but I'm holding a bit of judgment just until next year. If he wipes before Daniel, my word, next world champion, I'm with it. But
he was above Daniel this year, wasn't he?
Yeah, he finished. Did he finish third in the points? No.
Lando Norris, third. No,
let me check.
He was definitely below Sainz and below Charles Leclerc. He was like 8th or something.
He was
in
8th.
the drivers' standings.
Because I know heading into summer he was. I haven't checked, to be fair. I need to check this now. Let me check.
Yeah, I think he was.
He came 6th.
Max 6th.
Yeah, just behind Sainz.
Okay, so was it? Let me try and see. Was it Max, Lewis, Bottas, Perez, Sainz, Norris?
Norris.
Oh,
1 point above Leclerc.
Oh, Leclerc.
By 1 point.
Gosh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so Leclerc's race in Abu Dhabi really shit his points, because that was what he needed to be above Sainz as well.
Yeah.
So
he had an unlucky year, but I feel like Leclerc, right car.
I've been saying this. I think he could be the next person to challenge Lewis Hamilton in a championship. Because I think Lewis is always going to be the common denominator for some reason. I don't see anyone else. And as long as that man is on a car and the car's performing, he's going to be the common denominator.
100%.
So I do see Charles Leclerc in a good car. And I think Ferrari is going to be the ones to beat next year.
Same.
I have a feeling that they are going to work on that car, and next year they're going to be up there getting those pole positions. And Lewis is going to have to work his way through.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a Ferrari fan. I think I was saying this to Bryson. Yeah, since I was a kid, because I got into the sport with Michael Schumacher, even though I didn't realise he was a bit of a dirty driver at the time. But well, not dirty, on the limit, should I say, before I get attacked on Twitter. But yeah, but for me, Mercedes is what it is because of Lewis. That's the reason I'm like, yeah, go Mercedes. But yeah, I want to see Ferrari return to that next step. If they can sign Lewis, fine, do what you need to. That was I know. That was my hope in 2019, but it never came to
Apparently
fruition.
they wanted to. It was on the works.
Yeah.
Apparently. but it never came to life. I mean, it's good. I feel like balance is one thing that I enjoy in F1 as well. You know how every single team is kind of built around one driver? Because I think having, basically fighting your own teammate for me is kind of like boring. I think 2016 showed us very much, 2007-8 as well, where you kind of find out if your teammate is just, for me, it's not exciting. I mean, no, not 2007, because who won 2007 was Kimi, right?
Kimi, yeah.
Yeah, 2008 and all these things where teammates are fighting each other, for me, it's kind of like, I don't want to see that because you have the same machinery. I'm not looking at, it's not diverse, but then the balance of having Max, Lewis, Charles, and I say Charles because right now he's probably, for me, the best driver in the Ferrari.
Yes.
Charles and then Lando, and then just having that one person in the team is what balances everything out, because that's what teams are kind of looking for. Is like, who is building this team, right? Who are we building this team around? So that's what they did with Max.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, everything is going to go towards Max's play and basket. Lewis with Mercedes, I think Ferrari's kind of like on a neutral point, but I know they're going to do it towards Charles because he has the longest contract and all of that. With McLaren, they signed Norris for like 2-3 years. I'm sure they're going to develop the car towards him.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And like Ocon, for instance, he got like the French government endorsing him and all of that, so he has like a long-term contract until 2024.
Yeah.
So teams are looking for that one common denominator, like you are going to be our shining star. And I think that balances off the grid, because you kind of don't know which cars are going to be in front. Obviously, we've seen Mercedes dominate, but you weren't expecting Red Bull to come out and say, our number one driver is going to make sure he's wiping the floor with your driver, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that's a good thing.
That's a good thing. I have to counter slightly, because I love the intra-teammate battles. For me, it's, Lewis versus Button at McLaren. I was thinking, who is going to get ahead? Like, when Lewis posted the telemetry, which, of course, doesn't exist anymore, I was thinking, why is he doing that? But for me, it was a bit of a drama. That's the drama we need in F1, not scripted finishes.
The Twitter where he's like, saying, oh, why is Button not even getting a second?
You know, for me, I was here for it.
Today, we should do that today. Yeah. No, okay, you make a lot of sense. I think it spices things up, because you have same cars, almost the same team.
Yeah.
You're doing basically the same thing. You're helping each other out, and at the same, like, on the same breath, you lose into your teammate. You're kind of asking yourself, what are they doing on that side of the garage that we're not doing? I want to find out.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
I could see Ferrari with that problem next year, if I'm honest, because Carlos Sainz is, I don't know why he's so underrated. Maybe because he's just so chill, but he comes across very laid back and such. But he knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing. He can drive. He can drive, and like we forget. Like, I'm not taking his background into playing. His dad's a world rally champion as well. Like, he would have been schooled in wet weather driving from the moment he could walk. When we're all going to school learning how to read and write, he's there like doing a go-kart, spinning around at like 80 miles an hour.
I know what you're saying, and I feel like Ferrari right now is on a neutral step. To the point where they're kind of like, whoever next year is delivering is going to be the person we're going to lean towards.
Yes.
This is why I'm kind of like, okay, I understand Charles is the golden boy, but they found someone they weren't expecting to be as good as he is. I don't think Matthias Sainz saying, we know this guy is going to make sure, because Sainz ultimately got Ferrari that P3 in the constructors.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You kind of do the maths. Yeah, he was the one who dragged Ferrari up there with Charles bad luck and all of that. So I feel like, because the car is going to be completely new, regulations are new, I feel like they're going into like a fresh page, whatever, and they're saying, you know what, go on, do your thing, and whoever actually does it better is going to be the guy who's going to give all the input. I think that's how it's sitting down, you know.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting, and I can't wait to watch it. Yeah, I'm getting excited. I cancelled my F1 TV, but I might have to restore it. I cancelled it in solidarity with Lewis, but we'll see what happens.
We'll see how it goes in the next few weeks.
Yeah, I'm still holding out my race tickets, so we'll see what we do from there.
Race tickets, you say?
Yeah. Well, I can't say it on the podcast because I have a surprise plan for someone, but yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah, which would be pretty cool. But just quickly, do you watch any other motorsport like WEC or MotoGP, or do you pure F1 in and out?
Just F1, because I think for me it's kind of like my brain wants to understand everything, right? I'm not kind of the person who just sits at home and watches the Sunday race and like, ooh, Hamilton's winning. I want to know why he's winning, what he's doing, what's everyone else doing differently, So I think I wouldn't have enough space to do that with every series, because I would start watching F2 and be like invested in the driver and want to know what is this guy doing, who's this guy, why is he not getting an F1 seat, you know? So I just stay away from all of that and I just indulge into F1. So that's kind of me right now.
Nah, fair enough.
Are
Fair
you
enough.
watching anything else?
Yeah, I sort of hog the sofa on a Sunday, and yeah, I'm not going to say what other days because I do have other listeners to this, but yeah, MotoGP for me, I've got a love of bikes, so MotoGP and World Superbike. Although I've started to try and get into WRC, like World Rally, and I watch a bit of WEC, which is cool, but F1 is key.
No, I could watch a bit of like Extreme E.
Oh, I can't do it. I'm sorry, I can't do it. I tried. Like,
I
I like.
watch it for a bit, but not get into it and not want to know why they switching drivers, why they're doing all of that. No, I just watch it with one and then just let it go.
I watched the first two races to see if Lewis would compete, and once I realised that he wouldn't because of the crash, I was like, nah, sod this, I'm not watching it. There's no point. Like, it's great. It's got good drivers, really well cast drivers, and I like the fact that they've got a male and a female. Fantastic. I just can't get into the racing. Like, what's the? Yeah.
It's so much thing, is it?
No, not yet.
It's just extreme, very extreme. I'm like, how do you not break your necks doing
Yeah.
all of that?
Hopefully next year the quality's a bit better in terms of the purpose, because I get driving across the countries and different states in order to raise money for climate awareness. I believe in it, but I need more. I need something more. I need more Carlos Sainz slamming the door midair, like that sort of action that he was doing. So
his dad's there, isn't he?
Yeah. He pulled off this really cool stunt. I say stunt. He was I couldn't tell whether he was freaking out or whether it was purposeful. He was going over like a dune, and his car was in midair, and the door just like swung open, and he had one hand on the steering wheel and just slammed it, and just slammed the door, and he just returned straight to it. I'll send you it on Twitter. I was like, what the hell? I was literally like, what the hell?
Because it could have gone really badly.
Yeah, get him in an F1 car. He'll do magic again. Like, honestly.
Yeah. Stop the signs.
Signs F1. Who knows?
Yeah. Oh yeah, there could be a team.
It could be a whole team. You know. But thank you so much for coming on, Denny. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. Listeners, if you are listening to the show, please give Denny a follow at FIA Girlie. I don't know if that handle's going to change in the wake of anything that happened over the past week. She calls herself, or used to call herself, a Twitter Michael Massey. So if you're interested in anything strategy related, data related, or just anything news that's upcoming from F1, please give Denny a shout. But thank you once again for coming on. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much. Such an honour to be in here. First podcast. Hopefully this has been like I'm going to go spiral into other ones. But thank you so much. It was lovely having you chat and talking about all things strategy and all the things that I really enjoy.
No,
So thank you.
you're more than welcome. And also, I know that you and a few others like Bryson, Matthew Summerfield, Scarbs as well, have set up the Discord channel. If you're interested in anything motorsport, telemetry, data, analytics, powertrains, please ask Denny for an invite and you'll be blown away, honestly. So yeah.
It's lovely. Are you on the server?
I am. I don't actually post. I just watch. I'm literally a lurker.
I think you get information either way. Like, you don't even have to speak. Anyone comes in and asks something, and you like reading and see, oh, that's why it happened. So yeah, it's
you know
a
what
great
it
place
is?
to be in.
As much as I think I know, sometimes I'll read something. I'm like, hold on, I didn't think about that breaking point. the acceleration's too much. And I'm like, nope, I'm not going to comment. I'm not going to get shot down. Like I'll do that on the podcast where it's not so blatant. But yeah. But no, thank you so much. And I will see you soon.